In this video, I'm going to teach you how to knit an applied I-cord. If you want to learn how to knit a regular I-cord, there's a link in the description box to that tutorial. An applied I-cord is a method of adding a rolled trim to the edges of your knit projects. Most I-cords are done with 3 or 4 stitches, and the number of stitches you cast on will be the number of stitches in your I-cord. And you can use whatever cast on you prefer. I am doing the knit cast on right now, and I'm going to cast on 3 stitches to make a 3-stitch I-cord. If you wanted to make a 4-stitch I-cord, you would cast on 4 stitches. And then we're just going to knit the first row like normal. Now I'm knitting continental style. I will demonstrate the I-cord in English style as well. But these are just regular knit stitches, so just knit them as you normally would. Now, I've got the 3 stitches, and I've knit the first row. Now I'm going to pick up my piece, and we're going to pick up an edge stitch. Now, you just pick up the stitches as you would normally. We are going to work with the back of the work facing us. And we're going to pick up and knit a stitch, just like that. Now slide the stitches to the other end of your needle. You can use a circular needle or double pointed needles for this method. Now the working yarn is at the bottom stitch of the needle, and we're going to knit to the last 2 stitches. So I'm going to knit these first 2. If you had more stitches on the needle, you would knit to the last 2 stitches. And with the last 2 stitches, we're going to slip, slip, knit. Now your slip slip knit might look slightly different from mine. Some people insert the needle the opposite direction. Don't worry about that. Just do it the way you've been taught. Now we're going to pick up another stitch in the next spot right here at the edge. I'm going to pick up and knit. And again, we have 4 stitches on our needle, 1 more than what you've casted on. Pull the stitches to the other end, so that the working yarn is now at the bottom stitch, and knit across those stitches. And we're going to keep going like that. We're going to knit get to the last 2, and then slip, slip, knit. And that's how we do every row. So one more time, continental style, and then I'll switch to English. We're going to pick up and knit, and slide those stitches to the other end of the needle. Knit till we get to the last 2 stitches. Then slip, slip, knit. So slip, slip, knit. Now I'm going to switch to English style to show you what it looks like if you're an English style knitter. So I'm going to pick up my next stitch, and again the yarn, when we move the stitches to the other end of the needle, the yarn is coming out of the bottom stitch. And we knit till we get to the last 2 stitches. And then we slip, slip, knit. Now there are other ways of doing the I-cord. Some people knit 2 together through the back loop instead of slip, slip, knit, and some people do a type of like bind off or pass the slip stitch over. So if you've seen other people demonstrate I-cord, methods are not wrong, they're just different. So we're at the corner here, and I started here intentionally because I wanted to show you how to do a corner. There's a couple of different ways you can do a corner. One way is to simply not pick up a stitch, but instead slide your stitches to the other end of the needle and knit 1 row of regular I-cord. So I've just got the number of stitches that I've casted on, and I'm going to knit them. They're not connected to the piece, but what it does is it gives it a little bit of space to get around that corner. So I'm going to knit those 3 stitches. And then I would go to my first stitch on the next side and continue by picking up the stitch and continuing on with my I-cord. Now, the other method is to work 3 stitches, 3 I-cord rows in the same stitch. So here's the stitch that I was just working in. I'm going to insert my needle back in that same stitch and work another I-cord row in that stitch, 2 more I-cord rows in that stitch, for a total of 3 I-cord rows in that same stitch. And that will give it enough slack to get around the corner. And you can experiment with which method you like. Another way you could do it would be to do 1 I-cord row, then do a regular I-cord row like I just showed you, and then another I-cord row in the same stitch, so that it's a little bit less bulky in the corner. Rather than having 3 I-cord rows in the same stitch, you've got just the 2 because you've knit 1 regular I-cord row in between them. I hope that makes sense. But it's going to depend on your project. I've noticed in my own work that when I do 3 stitches in the corner, that it produces a slightly sharper corner than when I do the regular I-cord row to round the corner. That makes the corner just a little bit more soft, a little bit rounder than when I do the 3 stitches in one. Okay, so we get around the corner and we just keep going as we have been going. So if you are working around a piece like I am here, around the outside of a piece, or around a neckline, like on the inside of a neckline, then you are going to come around and meet the beginning of your I-cord. So you're going to go the whole way around the piece, and you're going to come back here and meet the beginning. And I have a piece already prepared to show you how to connect the beginning and the end. Now, if you are working a piece where you're just doing the I-cord edge on, say, one side of a piece, and you don't have to connect the beginning and the end, that's fine. You can just bind off like normal, or bind off in whatever manner would be best for that project. If it's in the project instructions, they may well tell you exactly how to bind off, whether you want to just kind of gather up all of those stitches together with your tail, or bind them off with a traditional bind off. But if you're going around a project, then you're going to want to connect the beginning and end so they're as seamless as possible. And the way that I like to do it is kind of a combination of Kitchener stitch here on the ending part and grafting on the beginning part. So what you want to do is cut a tail about 12 inches long and thread it on a darning needle. Then with the working yarn coming from the bottom stitch, so I still have the working yarn down here on the bottom stitch, not up here at the needle tip, but it's the working yarn's coming out of the bottom stitch. You want to insert the darning needle purlwise into the first stitch on your needle and pull the yarn through, but leave that stitch on the needle. Then come over here to your beginning part and find the V that is furthest to the right. So you can see this stitch right here makes a V. I'm just going to insert my needle under the 2 legs of that V and draw the yarn through. Then we want to insert the darning needle knitwise into the first stitch on the needle and slide that stitch off. Pull the yarn through and insert the darning needle into the next stitch on your needle purlwise, but leave it on the needle. Then come back over to the beginning side and here's the yarn that I'm working with right now, my tail coming out right there. So we want to insert the needle where your yarn is coming out from the last stitch and pick up the legs of the stitch next to it. So we're going to pick up the two legs of this stitch right here and bring the yarn through. Then back to the knitting needle and bring the needle, the darning needle, into that stitch knitwise and slide it off the needle. Then purlwise into the next stitch and leave it on the needle. And I know this sounds complicated. I do have written instructions for this in my full tutorial, and there is a link in the description box. And then on the next stitch on your beginning I-cord here, pick up both legs of it and bring the yarn through. And when you have just one stitch left on your needle, you want to bring your needle in knitwise, bring the yarn through and slide that stitch off the needle. Now I've done this really loosely, so it looks a little sloppy, but you can, once you're done, you can use your darning needle and tighten up your stitches. I don't necessarily pull, you can pull the tail some, but once you get your stitches all nice and even, then it is pretty much a seamless, and I could make that a little bit neater, but I'm not going to take the time here on the video to bore you with me nitpicking at my yarn. But just trust me, when I tighten that up and make it a little bit neater, it will be pretty much perfectly seamless. Now there's something I wanted to show you on this swatch. Do you see how this top is curving like this? It's because knit stitches are wider than they are tall, so they're kind of short and fat, which means when you are working across the top and bottom of a piece, you need to do extra I-cord rows across the top and the bottom, because these stitches they're going this way, but these stitches are going this way. So these stitches are wide, but these stitches are short. So because these stitches are shorter than these are wide, we need to put extra stitches in here. I did not put extra stitches in here. I just picked up one I-cord stitch for each column of knitting, and it's caused my edge to bow. Whereas on the bottom here, you can see it's straighter because I picked up extra stitches. Typically, you're going to want to pick up 3 I-cord stitches for every 2 columns of knitting, or 4, or let's see, 2 out of 3, or 3 out of 2, or 4 out of 3. So 3 stitches of I-cord for every 2 columns of knitting, or 4 rows of I-cord for every 3 columns of knitting. So basically, if I'm going to do the 2 out of 3, and I have this all explained in writing in the full tutorial. If I want to pick out 2 out of 3, what I would do is pick up a stitch for a row for the I-cord. So that'd be 1. And then in the next one, I would pick up 2 rows of I-cord in the same stitch, and I would work that way the whole way across. If I was doing 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 3, I would pick up 3 rows like normal, and then in that 3rd stitch I would pick up a 4th row and work that way the whole way across so that they're evenly spaced. Now when you're going up the sides, there is no issue because your I-cord stitches are in the same direction as your knitting, so they should be the same height as your knitting stitches. It's just going across the top and the bottom where that's an issue. So like I said, I do have a full tutorial. It's quite comprehensive on knitting an applied I-cord. I encourage you to check out the description box if you're not already looking at this on the tutorial page, and check out that tutorial.